It's not 5 o'clock, and they don't care. Welcome to Wine to 5. Entertainment, education, and everyday drinking for everyday people. Your hosts are Valerie Caruso and Stephanie Davis, two wine educators who don't need a clock to know when to pour that next glass.
It is W25 Book Club time, and today we're going to review Tangled Vines, Greed, Murder, Obsession, and an Arsonist in the Vineyards of California, written by Frances Dinkelspiel.
And our guest co-host will lead the book review discussion from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And today we have Meg Hansen here.
Meg is joining us from South Dakota, where for the past 13 years she has been the executive director of the South Dakota Board of Medical and Osteopathic Examiners. Now, Meg is a physician assistant in the allergy and asthma field by trade. So how did she get into wine? Well, that was a complete accident. And we'll put the complete story in the bio, but it had to do with a chef leaving his country club employment and Meg stepping in at the last minute to take the Society of Wine Educators Certified Specialist of Wine examination. She was also fortunate enough to participate in and pass the Quartermaster Sommelier's introductory course that was taught by Master Sommeliers Fred Dame and Matt Stamp, and she does hold the Certified Specialist of Wine and Certified Specialist of Spirits credentials. She wears her CSW and CSS pins at every opportunity, and if they do not get noticed, much to the chagrin of her family, she points them out. Meg is proud to be Wine25's very first patron ever. Welcome, Meg.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's so much fun to be drinking in the middle of the day with you. So we thank you for taking the time to join us. And we're going to start, as you know, because you've been a loyal listener for a long, long time. We start the show every week with what is in our glasses. And today's going to be no exception, Meg. So what are you pairing with this discussion today?
Today, I am pairing High West Whiskey Campfire. It's a blend of straight rye whiskey, straight bourbon whiskey, and blended malt Scotch whiskey in honor of the fire throughout our book today.
Oh, my goodness. And that is from, you said, Park City, Utah.
Yes.
Nice.
High West Distillery.
Okay. That sounds good. That's one of the ones I want to try.
Yeah, and I think, isn't High West, like, I might have this wrong, but I think it was like one of the very first distilleries to open in Utah.
It may have been. I was just fascinated because of the blend, and also because there is a drink you can make. I haven't done it, but I do have the recipe printed out at some more drink, which I thought was really intriguing.
Oh, with like graham cracker or something?
Yes.
Ooh.
Yes.
Ooh.
Yes.
Yeah.
Will you let us know when you make it?
Yeah. I'll send you the recipe.
Okay, cool. Yeah, maybe we post that with that would be cool.
You know what, Steph, you're right. This opened right after I was there visiting in 2007, and this opened that year. And it was the first licensed distillery to legally operate in Utah since the end of Prohibition.
Yeah.
Good job.
Pretty cool.
All right, and that concludes this episode.
Pulling out some factoids out the trap door.
I know.
Well, I don't have anything that's like a campfire. I wouldn't say this is any kind of a book and wine pairing, but I do have a really lovely Cru Beaujolais in my glass from Domaine La Tuilière, and it's a Bruy. And this came in the first weekly tasting shipment, so I was excited to bust it open, and I'm enjoying it with some salted and roasted almonds. And it is peppery. I wouldn't say it's smoky, but it is kind of peppery. I like that. So very cool.
Very nice. And I think if you were going to try to tie it in with our discussion today, Bruy, doesn't that mean to burn?
Oh. Ooh, right. I think that you could make a connection there with the book. We can make it work somehow.
We will stuff this square peg into a round hole right now.
That's right. Well, what are you drinking? Did you find something that pairs with the book?
Actually, no. I paired with what I had open. I had the 2016 Tormaresca California Rosato Salento Puglia Dalia Negromaro. So what it is Tormaresca is the producer, California is the wine. It's a Rosato, which means
rosé.
Pink wine. Rosé, yeah. and Salento being an appellation in Puglia, in Italy, and the grape is 100% Negro Amaro, black and bitter like my soul, charred, if you will, to tie it in with today's discussion.
You did it.
I did it.
I knew you would do it.
Bam. All right, let's get into the book review. So, Meg, we want to get started with, I don't know if you had a place you wanted to start, or if you want to start with your biggest takeaway, or we're going to just turn it over to you and let's get going.
I should tell you that I first listened to this in Audible, and it took me by surprise as I was listening to it, because we were talking about a crime that happened, the arson event, and then all of a sudden we were talking about far back history in California. So it just kind of made me really stop and pay attention. And for a little while, I was a little confused about how she does not go in chronological order. It's a book about crime in the present with wine, but it's also a deep history of California before California was a state. She has a personal connection to this through her family. Her great-great-grandfather had winery holdings, and she goes into the history before it comes into her family and then after as well. What I found really interesting, I mean, after I listened to it, I thought this could be a good book for, your book club. But I also decided to get the book, and I was glad that I did, because you miss out on a lot when you just listen to it. She has the characters listed out, which is really nice in the beginning. You have all your notes in the back as well. And it's just nice to be able to write in the book itself. But what really meant something to me was she starts out, and you can tell, she's a reporter and also an author, and she does a lot of different topics. But she was asking that question about, what is it about wine that makes it so special? Why is it, as she said, why are people so passionate about something that was at the end of the day one liquid among millions? And so I think she starts off with these questions in the introduction, and then goes through all of these, some people might say convoluted or tangled or intricate or interwoven stories. And I thought some of the interesting things that people had to say about this book was her style of not going in chronological order just actually made you want to turn the pages faster and get to, what happened. So that's my overview, quick overview. And not to spoil the ending, but when she gets to the end and talks about why wine is so special and what drives people to do the things that they do for wine, it made me think actually of all the friendships with you as well as other people that I've met through the wine industry, that wine just has that ability to connect and bring people together. So that's my overarching analysis of this. I know I've skipped right through all of the crime and all of the history, but I know that you will come along and fill in some of the gaps as well, or I'm happy to do that as well. But I just thought Frances is a great storyteller, and she really made me look into the history of California and understand it better, just how it came about. One other thing I thought was very interesting was that although this book was published in 2015, you will see a lot of the, controversial political themes that are playing out now. Mm-hmm. And apparently it never has ended. Just the way that that immigrants, or that even the natives who live in the land as the people take over those lands, just how they're treated. And I thought that was very interesting, that, some things just never change.
I noticed that part too. And I also am in agreement with you on how I paused. I listened to the book too. I didn't read it, but it was on Audible. But I paused at how, yes, it really does connect people. And I was like, And I made a note, just like how we're all going to have this podcast together. I mean, if it wasn't for wine, we wouldn't be doing, what we're doing right now, which is all, talking about a book about wine. But that's why we have these friendships and connections, like you said. So I was like, that's exactly what I thought.
It's interesting because you mentioned, of course, the political thing that none of us can get away from right now. It was so poignant and relevant into what we're dealing with today. But also, I think that was Becca from Academic Wino that mentioned it made you want to turn the pages. I think it was her. I can't remember who gave that review because I did look at your references. But something I noticed is it took me a while to realize that she was going to keep going back and forth throughout the book. So in 1 minute, you're in 2005, the crime is progressing, the investigation is progressing, and then the next thing you're back in the 1800s again. And having been to Rancho Cucamonga and gone out there and seeing the vast amounts of urban sprawl now, being a little interested in the wine regions that are less known, like down near in Southern California, you don't hear about those regions very often. But also, I noticed that it took me a while to realize what she was doing because there are books I couldn't get into, like Time Traveler's Wife. That book, I had a friend send it to me in Iraq, and I really tried to get into it, and they kept going back and forth. I believe that was the book where they keep going back and forth in time in that book. And I'm like, I cannot get into a book that's written that way. And this has been the critique of this book by some people that, they couldn't stand the way, they just didn't divide the book into two parts. They couldn't go back and forth. But then I've read books since then that happen in Italy, for example, where they're going back and forth, through these Ligurian towns to the past, to the present, to the past, to the present. And I thought, okay, and I was able to follow it really well. And she got over on me because I had no idea she was really going to keep on with that pattern until we're nearly into part 3 because I'm slow like that. And I actually appreciated being ripped away from the present and thrown back into the past. And then you're kind of into the past, and then they kind of okay, back to the present. And so now there's this guy eating in a sushi restaurant with his Japanese friends. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. No, I want to hear what happened to Doña Merced. What happened to her?
Right.
Right?
Right. Yeah, I agree. I wasn't sure I liked it at first either. In fact, when it first started and you had tasked me with looking into a book to read.
Yeah, we tasked
you. So I felt great responsibility for choosing something that would really, be something good. I'll tell you, I'll be honest. At first I was like you, Val. I said, no, this one does not make the cut. But then I think if you even go back to the title, The Tangled Vines, you can see how methodical and why she did it. The method behind the madness as to how she did that. And I just think it makes it much more interesting than if she had 2 books out of this, say. I
agree. And it was funny because when the book was first, because I'm not into murder mysteries or anything. And I thought, oh, is this nonfiction? And then a little while, I'm like, wait, this really happened. This is
right.
That's
real.
Exactly what I thought, too. I was kind of confused at first, and I don't know if I was also confused because of the back and forth, but I wasn't too convinced that it was fiction or nonfiction. And then it really took me halfway through the book before I really started to get in the groove of her writing and the history and the stories. And then at the end, she had my full attention and I was very interested right at the end. So the experience of the book changes as you're reading it.
It really does. It really does. And I have to ask if anybody here was as excited to hear Fred Dame's tasting notes on that bottle as I was. I stopped what I was doing to hear what he was going to say.
Yeah, I actually wrote down about one of my favorite parts was the Fred Dame part, because not only was it some insight, it's just her personal experience and personal opinion about him, which I don't want to give that away, but I thought that was those comments were kind of intriguing. And then when she described how time slowed as they were tasting the wine together, and I was like, oh, she's getting it. She gets it now. So that was important. I thought that was a important part of the book at the end.
Meg, where did you hold your breath? Where was that moment in the book for you?
Well, actually, as you know, I found a connection in this book that I should probably bring up.
Yes.
And that is with Delia Viader. I held my breath with her because I did not know she was going to be in the book. And all of a sudden she was there, and I love her wine. And I thought, I'm pretty sure I have some of her wine. So I had to go and dig it out of the cellar. And as I read through the book, and they were saying all of her 2003 vintage was destroyed, I kept thinking, well, wait a minute. I have a Magnum of the 2003 V. So did it get saved from the warehouse? Did she snag it with, that little bit that she was able to put in the SUV and the pickup truck and haul it back to her vineyard? Or, how did I get this? So I actually had to call the wine shop where I bought it. And he said, well, you actually either had to get it during one of his open houses when he has a lot of the winemakers come to his wine shop. It's a wine shop in Omaha. And so he has this open house that's really spectacular. And he also does a fundraiser for multiple sclerosis, so for MS. So I may have gotten it through that fundraiser. But he said, for sure, Delia Villader was there. And this Magnum, the larger format, she did not take those to the central warehouse.
That's fascinating.
So it's amazing.
I had these little thoughts when I looked at the wine fraud section. I thought, did someone put a label on this and it's counterfeit? Am I in possession of that? But with the box and with the label and everything, you can tell it's legit. So.
Oh my gosh, that was fascinating. Because at first, I didn't make the connection when you sent the picture of the bottle. And then I went, wait, I know what that is. Because again, I'm slow, but I get there. But I think, like you mentioned, I think because I did it on Audible and I was doing it at 1.5 speed, because that's how I listen to podcasts and everything, because I want to hear it as fast as I talk. And I'm listening to the book super fast. And it took me a while to look at the spelling of the word Villader, first of all, and then associate it with your V wine. So I was a little bit, but once I realized what you had, I'm like, that is so cool. Now, did you meet her, or have you been to that winery at all?
Well, I've not been to the winery. I'm assuming I may have met her at this event, but it's been years ago. So many wines, so many bottles. You'd think my memory would be better, but he does an amazing meet and greet, and you do meet a lot of people. So it seems to be quite a character. I wish I could say I remember shaking her hand, but I'll just have to say I was lucky enough to be probably in the room with her. But, I would have had that wine in my glass today, except it's a Magnum. Yeah. And Meg is not going to drink a Magnum by herself.
And thank you for that.
Yes. So I do plan to bring it to the SWE conference in New York.
Wow.
And share it with, anybody who wants to share a little bit of history. And according to my friend at the wine shop, he said it is drinking beautifully.
Oh, that is so generous of you. Thank you so much. So anybody that's in the book club and listening, this would be something special.
Yeah. Right.
Oh, that is so generous.
Well, did you find a lot of interesting parts of history throughout this book that I did not know? And maybe you and some of the listeners know. But we found out how we got White Zinfandel. Did you see that part? Hear that part?
Well, yeah, and we've had Barry Wiss, the current president of Society of Wine Educators, on the show, and he actually told that story way back, because he works for Bob Trincaro.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah, he gave the whole selling out of the trunk of the car side of the story with that charming New Orleans accent that he has, that Barry has, and it's a really great story. So yeah, we did know that part, but there was a lot I didn't know about the whole Rancho Cucamonga history and the little bit of wine that is still made around that area, the 500 acres that are left, or 500, I can't remember, 500, was it vines left or 500 acres left? And
I don't remember.
It's really super small. I didn't understand a lot of that part of the history, but yeah, there was, and this fire, where were you guys when this fire happened? It's not like we all didn't drink wine back then. I don't remember this being on my radar.
Yeah, it wasn't on mine, but I wasn't into wine. Remember. I really wasn't that serious. Well, when Yeah, right.
It's 2005.
2005.
I had just moved here. I just moved to Fort Collins, and I was starting to become, obsessed with wine. That was when my obsession started. But yeah, so I don't know. I should.
Same with me.
Yeah.
2005. I can say that really was when I started really understanding, knowing more about wine and enjoying better wines, knowing more.
Right.
Yeah.
But I also think because this trial took so long, that it was spread out over so much time, that even if you knew the initial part of it, unless you lived there, you probably weren't keeping up with when he finally is taken, to justice. And it's a fascinating tale about, a con man. He's really a con man who's, a narcissist. So he's very charming. Everybody loves him. And he really took advantage of people. And, just his con artist part was very tragic. But then he compounded that with this huge fire and destroying all this wine. It's just very sad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So much damage to so many people. The damage isn't just, the fire, but it's just so many people's livelihoods and businesses and family heirlooms.
I think the way it played out in court was Tim Hall making that case about, well, this isn't just juice. With him making the case on how it impacted everybody, but then going back to what Meg was saying about this person's narcissism and his lying and his conning and trying to convince people he didn't do it. And again, I'm drawing parallels to today's political environment. And I'm just like, oh my God, there's just so much of this playing out today, this whole thing. And it just goes to show you that the wine, I'd heard somebody say before, and not everybody will agree with it. I won't tell you who said it, but they said that the wine industry was a filthy business. And I'm like, well, any industry can be a filthy business if you think about it. But the fraud and the lying and the greed and all the stuff that went into this just makes me go, wow, I'm so glad I'm just sitting in front of a microphone every week, drinking it and not having to worry about losing my livelihood over a fraud bottle or somebody trying to cheat me.
Yeah, I think the scandals and the fraud, you hear about some historical, like we've mentioned a number of scandals on the podcast before, and now even on Netflix, you can watch, some of these movies about scandals in the wine industry. But she brought up so many of them over such a long period of time that was just in California alone that you start to go, wow, this is worldwide, like wine scandal is happening all the time. And it has historically and continues today.
Absolutely.
Right.
The Fred Franzia scandal, where he was like falsifying the Zinfandel grapes, saying he had Zin when he was really selling them less appealing varieties. I didn't know that. That was one of the things I learned.
I didn't know that either.
I don't remember that either. And it's amazing the things that we don't get exposed to. But I have to point something else out because there was something I'd forgotten about, the Angelica. And I don't know if a lot of listeners have heard about Angelica, but I've actually had Angelica wine from California. And I almost, Steph, I didn't even think about it. I didn't get on the website until I guess it was late Tuesday. I'm like, I wonder if I can get some express shipped here. But Visa Tui still makes it. And I remember having some from there, and I should have express shipped this to the house because that we could both enjoy it on the show, but there was just no way that was going to happen. But they still make it. It's about $48 a bottle, and we'll let the listeners either read the book to figure out what the importance was of that, because I didn't realize that was an important part of California wine tradition as well. I just thought it was something that they did, and it was something I used to go. It's kind of like a mandatory stop when you're first learning about wine and you want to have a picnic on the grounds. You go to Satui, get a bottle, and you get cheese, and you sit on a picnic table, and you fight off the bugs, and you enjoy it. And I'm still a member of the wine club. I don't order regularly now, but I always like to go and taste down in the basement. And they've been making this for a long time, and so they do have a few of those kind of wines. So I thought that was interesting because I went back to the website. I'm like, oh, they still make that. And I've actually had it. And it's the only time I've ever heard of it outside of that place.
I had never heard of it before. that was intriguing to me.
Yeah. So that was a kind of a little cool nod back to the time when I was first learning about wine and buying things that I just thought were interesting. And I kept that bottle of Angelica. I probably drank it in 2005. I think I bought it in 2000, maybe. It was a 98, I think, when I bought it. And I think I might have drinking it that year when I got back from Afghanistan. But yeah, it was just one of those crazy ways to connect where you were at that time, or where you were in your wine learning, or tying it into the experiences we have now and into current day wine culture.
Did you guys also feel that the whole Sushi Ron restaurant, how many times in a year he and some of these people would eat at this restaurant? I thought that was one of the weirdest things I had ever heard. Really? Do people eat at restaurants that often, or find that as a fun kind of game or challenge to go to a restaurant 300 times in a year or so?
I think it's an ego. I think that was feeding the ego. And I think feeding being the double entendre, because if you knew.
Well, He took it on. He said challenge accepted, right? But he would go just drop in. Yeah. And what didn't she say, have a glass of wine, or even I can't remember if maybe he had tea or something, and that would count as a visit.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's
so absurd.
Yeah, it's no surprise that he would, maybe try to game the system a little bit.
Right.
Yeah.
Joe Sausalito.
That was crazy. So it was interesting because I think, like you said, Meg, when it first came out, I'm like, I don't know if that's my kind of book, because I thought it was going to be nonfiction and I didn't tie it to the real events at the time. But I think I'm going to have to agree with you that Steph and I both agree we would have enjoyed it more had we read it instead of listened to it. And there are many times where I'm a big fan of Audible. I've got 6 books in Audible open right now that I'm jumping back and forth between. But for one, the reader barely pronounced some of these words in a way that didn't make me want to throw my phone. So
yes.
Yeah, I think at one time instead of rosé, she said rose. Instead of Bacchus, it sounded like backass. And I'm like, did she say backass?
Well, Saint Helena was Saint Helena one time and Saint Helena another time.
Right.
So
I noticed that too. Yeah, I think the voice actor knows very little about wine. We can all agree. For wine lovers listening to this show, we recommend that you read the book, not listen to it.
Right. And even we get things wrong. I think I've said Sauvignon instead of Sauvignon. There are just things that we're going to get wrong.
Sure.
Nobody's perfect.
Yeah.
We live in that glass house. We're not going to throw the stones. But at the same time, if you read the reviews, I'm like, I should have read this first. Because for some of us, it drives us crazy. So if I'm listening to a book, I want it to be said correctly so I can learn from it. But that was the only thing that was a distractor. And then once I got to part 3 of the book, then it was like smooth sailing. Then it was like, okay, I don't want to just mandatorily listen for today. I want to actually keep hearing it. I want to hear the rest of the story. And it made me want to know what happened to these people afterwards. I remember standing in Trader Joe's buying some dried fruits and nuts, listening to the part about the historical building, the Doña Merced, when she protected the building. And then, of course, they named a school after her later. But I'm like, well, whatever happened to her? What happened to her? And she tells you at the end, but you start Googling. Any book that makes you start Googling, or I don't use Google, I use something else, but that starts making you research what happened, because you can't wait to hear the end of the book. I think that's very inspiring. Any book that inspires you to learn more about a person, a place, a thing, whatever it is, I think is pretty impactful.
Right.
I agree.
The other thing that you get with the book too is you get the pictures.
Yeah,
there are some really nice pictures. And I'll loan my book to anyone, but they would have to put up with. I did go through and mark all of the end notes, and looked into those. And again, if you read some of her remarks in the end notes, those are really interesting if you like the research, kind of geeky part of stuff. So I think I would recommend getting the book itself. The other thing, I don't want to forget this. If you've seen a picture of the book,
yes,
and at least one of the blogs that I sent has a picture of, it has the 2 wine glasses with the fire in the wine glass. And if you look at the top of the book, you can see where it's burned. Oh. So I just thought that was pretty cool. It's a good cover.
Well, I'd be lying if I didn't say I went to the author's website and stalked, and all the pictures are there too, which is really nice. And a lot of the...
Oh, good.
Yeah, so if you go to her website, she gives a lot of thoughts, and there are some photos of her ancestors who made that port wine that she shared with Fred Dame, and there are pictures of the... I want to say there was a picture of Doña Merced in there. There was some more information.
Yes.
So, you can actually...
Oh, that's good. Well, she knows that we are doing the book review because I followed her on Facebook.
Okay.
And told her that we were going to do the podcast. So she said thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So,
well,
you're such a good co-host, Meg. Way to go.
I think I'm going to take a month off and let Meg do it.
We're going on vacation, Meg. You're going to take over.
Sure, I'll be your locum tenens. So, yeah.
Yeah, nice. Well, one other thing I wanted to tell you guys and ask you also, because when I was finishing the book, I was thinking in the back of my mind about wines to pair with the book. And this is more of just complete silliness. You know the brand that's called Fat Bastard?
Yeah.
I think that would be very appropriate for because of this character in the book. The other silly wine ideas I had, because these are wines that people can find, instead of, something obscure. The 19 Crimes wines from Australia, I think could be kind of, because of the criminal and all of the suspense and everything else. And then the last one, this might be a total giveaway, but The Prisoner. Right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So anyway, I think so many people have heard of those wines. But what I would actually want to be drinking myself would probably be just like a really nice tawny port.
I think that, or even something as an homage to Delia Villadere, or maybe a Hall. People who lost their wines, I almost think I would want to drink something to kind of pay homage to that.
Yeah.
I think that would be kind of an interesting thing to pair too. But I know that wasn't the subject that we went into. But I do want to ask one more question before we move on, Meg. Did this book change the way that you look at wine at all?
I think so. I'll tell you what it did for me. I just thought it was interesting because maybe I held some of these views before I really knew more about wine. But do you remember the part where the judge was kind of like, I don't know what to do with them. Maybe it should be long. Maybe it should be a short sentence.
Yeah.
And then he had a comment in there that everybody thinks that their wine is worth $10,000 a bottle.
Yes. Right.
And I think there are a lot of people who think, well, you're really snooty if you do wine. You must be really snooty. But I think it kind of humbled me to think about the people who make the wine. And it also has something to do with the fact that my daughter lives in Napa now. And basically I've been to Napa more, not just a special occasion time, but on more of an organic or just ordinary visit, and realize that the people there they're farmers. Mm-hmm. It's an agricultural area. So I think what it did for me, this book just kind of grounded me in how people struggle to make the wine and just how much it means to them. The way that we feel about wine when we drink it and it brings us together, as a group, and we're enjoying the wine, it also brings all of those people together. They're a community of wine growers, and they know each other, and they're just all there for each other. So I just thought that really changed somewhat the way that I would look at wine, and it was more humbling, I think would be the right word.
And that was a smaller scale of what we saw back in October when the fires broke out in wine country. Mm-hmm. And I actually stayed with some friends who are winemakers in Sonoma County. It's integrated into all parts of your life when you're a grower, but also that it's a community. They don't necessarily compete against each other. They help each other. And watching communities come together and hearing the stories after those large scale fires that burn down vineyards or burn down wineries and structures and watching them come together afterwards. So that little piece of the prosecution's case about, wait a minute, this isn't just juice. And then they go into the descriptions of what it all affects. We got to see that on a larger scale this past year as well. So right. I agree, bringing those aspects of the wine world out. And that's one of the things we want to do on this show. We don't just want to do a tasting every week and this is what the wine tastes like. We want to delve into aspects of the industry, and not just winemaking, but all the different aspects, to give listeners and people who love wine a different perspective and hopefully a greater appreciation of wine and beverage. So great point, Meg.
Yeah.
Well, if I could make one more too of that, I don't know if you'll hear it in Audible, but when Vineyards, they had them test the wine that they saved. They sent it to a laboratory to see how the different levels of heat exposure affected the bottles differently. And you'd have to read the end note to know that the ETS laboratories would determine that Cabernet Sauvignon and Petit Verdot were resilient to heat shock, while Syrah was not.
Oh.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, that's really fascinating.
I don't remember that from the book itself.
I remember it, but they didn't, because you're reading from the footnote or something, right?
I read the end note. The first part was just, she was doing research. It's a part where she sent this off it just says Vineyards asked them to test it and see how the different levels of heat exposure would affect the bottles differently. That's what the book says. Okay. It's a variation on the quote, if you've got lemons, make lemonade theory.
Oh,
but you wouldn't know unless you had the footnote 178, actually, or end note.
Okay.
That's the one where it talks about the ETS laboratory determined, that the two wines were resistant, but Syrah was not.
Yeah, and her insurance company didn't cover any of it, from what I understand.
No.
It was a total loss.
Awful.
Yes.
Awful.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a great discussion. Anything else before we move on to Wino Radar?
That's all for me.
I think that's all for me. I mean, even though there's probably other things we could comment about, people can maybe discuss in the Facebook community page.
There you go.
This is the reason book clubs gather and they open bottles and they sit around for an hour or two. This is why there's so much more to talk about. But Meg, I have to tell you, great pick.
Oh, good.
Yes, definitely came from a place of wisdom and culture, and it was way more poignant than I thought it was going to be. So I really appreciate it, and made me aware of more things historically in California and American wine that I was like, oh yeah, forgot about or didn't know.
Yeah.
Yay. Good.
Success.
Score.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, because I think I have
it
a pretty good one.
I think we forgot because we were so focused on the book review.
I think that's what happened. So yes, Meg just reminded us that we did not get to the favorite part of having guests on the show, which is our embarrassing wine story. And I think Meg has one that she wants to tell us. And so we want to kind of get it out of her right now. So Meg, please share that with us.
Well, I don't know if I want to share it, but I am prepared.
Oh, well.
Because I agree. I think we should all not take ourselves too seriously. And I definitely don't, because I just haven't, been doing it that long. But many years ago, and I mean prior to 2005, prior to 2000, actually, we were given, and we were not wine drinkers, but my husband and I were given a fancy bottle of French wine from one of our friends who was definitely in the know on wine. Like, I didn't even know you drank red wine, unchilled. That was shocking to me. So he gave us a bottle of Beaujolais Nouveau, and we were like, oh my gosh, this is just so fancy. We need to save it for a special occasion. So we did several years. And later, that friend he wanted to introduce everyone, to have everyone bring their bottle of wine to his house. And, he would get them all ready and everybody would taste the wines. And it would be so much fun. Bring your favorite bottle. Well, we thought, if it was good enough for him to give to us this fancy bottle of French wine, then certainly it's good enough to take to his house 5 years later. So we
this is already so funny.
I know.
So when we went to the event, we noticed, our wine was not there. He didn't have it for tasting at all. So we didn't say much. We just enjoyed the evening. And then later, flash forward to he was actually telling a story, and he attributed this wine being brought to his house to somebody different than us. And we were like looking at each other thinking, what are the chances that another couple brought a 5-year-old Beaujolais Nouveau to his event? But anyway, we know now why it didn't make an appearance. So.
Oh my goodness, Meg.
But
funny.
It was just too precious to drink,
You know what? I don't know how many of us have done that. You get a bottle, you don't recognize what that label, what Nouveau means, drink in the next year, if even 6 months. And you don't
3
know.
months.
Yes. But we've all done it. We've all done it.
That's right. We've learned. But
anyway, we need to move on to Wino Radar.
We're going to go on to Wino Radar. So if you have something to share, Meg, feel free to share that. I think Val's got something on her radar, and we'll just go from there.
I don't have anything to share for this section. I'll let you guys go ahead.
All right.
Okay.
Well, if you guys remember episode 164 with Jamison Fink, we've got some exciting news for you because he is now hosting a new podcast. It's called What We're Tasting. It is produced by wine enthusiasts, sponsored by Vivino, and has just launched. So each episode, they focus on 3 wines. The first episode is about South African wine, I believe. Just launched. They've got the 1 episode out. By the time this airs, there should be a few more. But if you love Jamison Fink, we do. We're going to go ahead and link that Wine Enthusiast podcast up for you because they do a dive into regions, if I'm not mistaken. Definitely one you guys should check. Yeah, like I said, just launched. Hot off the podcast presses.
And I have got a shout out. I've got a new iTunes review that Val and I are super excited about. So when this episode airs, it'll have been posted a few weeks. But we have a 5-star review from Emily. And she says, Steph and Val are naturals at teaching, which is what makes Wine25 unique. Their bubbly banter is peppered with a hearty dose of knowledge, so you end up learning about wine and spirits without even realizing it. The podcast is fun, informative, and has guests who provide additional layers of information. The podcast will help you navigate the world of alcoholic beverages without the snob factor.
Thank you, Emily.
Nice.
Yeah, that was beautifully written, too.
Yeah, that was a very nice one. And I like, it's so perfect that we do have a guest on today who's added additional layers of information.
Well, yes, because you know what we didn't do? We didn't tell everybody about Meg's background, but we're going to go ahead and put that in the blog. But she is a wine educator and an aspiring CWE candidate. Am I correct?
Yes.
Yes. So we're going to put her entire bio into our blog. But of course, that's natural for her to add to our depth of knowledge here. That's why we all like to do what we do. We like you to learn without knowing it.
Sneaky that way.
Yeah, it is sneaky. And we have another shout out to Weekly Tasting by WTSO, our sponsor.
That's right. Weekly Tasting shipment of 4 wines gives you an opportunity to compare and contrast wines side by side. And they provide tasting videos from the experts as well as pairing cards with recipes.
Yes, with really great information and recipes. And you can go to your very own listener page at weeklytasting.com/W25, as in W, the number 2 and the number 5, to sign up and get started, or just go on our webpage too. We have it at the top right corner and you can click.
Go right there. Yeah, it's really super cool. We just got ours. In fact, Steph, that's what you're drinking today. You're drinking one of yours, right?
Yeah. Yes, I'm drinking one. Had to be patient and wait for a show to open this bottle. But yeah, it's a super fun experience to get these bottles from Weekly Tasting.
The presentation is stunning, and I cannot wait to just post some pictures. So we'll have some pictures of that for you guys as well. But first, we need to get into some Patreon love, but even before that, we want to get into what we're calling Patreon foreplay. Why are we calling it that? Because we have our very first patron ever right here on the show with us. Meg has been a patron for almost 2 years now. Am I correct?
Yes.
Yeah, 2 years. So we're going to put her to work since she's hanging out with us today. And we need to harvest our next grape for our monthly grape gab. See what we did there? And we are each, all three ladies on the show today, going to pick a grape. Again, see what we did there? We're each going to pick a grape and let our listeners choose from the 3 grapes that we would like to see gabbed in the August Grape Gab. So I think we'll start with Meg. If you could have any grape gab about any grape, what would that grape be?
Oh, the pressure is on.
Yeah.
The pressure is on.
So we'll let Meg pick the first grape.
Okay, well, how about Cabernet Franc?
Cabernet
Okay,
Franc.
good. We haven't
have
done that
not
one.
done Cabernet Franc yet, so that is a really good one.
I love saying Franc.
I know. I love
It's just
drinking
fun.
Franc. So,
Oh,
too.
I do too.
all right. So we've got one for Cabernet Franc, and then Steph, what grape you want to gab?
I'm also going with a red variety, Tiraldigo.
Ooh, we're talking northern Italy there. So we got Cabernet Franc, which originated in France, and we've got Tiraldigo from northern Italy, and I'm going to go with Semillon.
Ooh.
I'm going to go with a white grape because I want to really get into mold, botrytis, and all that good stuff. So anyway, listeners, we're going to go ahead and put a poll up in our Facebook group from those 3 grapes, and you guys get to choose the grape that you want gabbed next month. So that'll be kind of fun. So Steph, time for some full-on Patreon love.
Yes, to our Reserva Superiore supporter, Robin from Girls Gone Grape, and our Reserva supporter, Auntie in Georgia.
And our tenacious tasters, Jeff E. from the award-winning We Like Drinking podcast, Sebastian of Sassy Italy Tours, Jen in Maryland, David and Lisa in Illinois, and Anne-Marie in Virginia. And then in South Dakota, and on this podcast today, we have Meg. We have Clay in Arizona. In California, we have John, Andrew, and Aswani. Chantel is in Ontario, Canada. Mary Lou's in Pennsylvania. Kathy's in Georgia. Chris, Janet, and Diane are here in Colorado. In Illinois, we have Steve and Renee. Kathy's in Tennessee. Ashley's in North Carolina. And Sean is in Ohio.
And our tastemaker listeners, David in Scotland, Carol in Kentucky, Karen in California, Chip and Katie in Pennsylvania, Serena in New York, and Danielle. And if you would like more information about Patreon, go to patreon.com/wine25podcasts and find out how to be on this list of supporters, because they are entered into our monthly drawing. They get exclusive content, they get early releases, and swag and other goodies.
Between each weekly episode, you can find us in the social spaces at Wine to Five. Pretty much all of them, some more than others, depending on our mood. I'm Val. You can connect with me on Twitter at WineGalUnboxed, and everywhere else is Vino with Val. Steph is the wine heroine. And Meg, where are we going to find you, Meg?
You can email me at gofishmbh@gmail.com, and I'm also on Facebook. Search me out.
And we're going to see you in August, right? At the Society of Wine Educators Conference?
Absolutely.
Which is where we all met.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes.
Oh, Meg. Well, this is so great. Thank you for hanging out with us this afternoon.
Thank you. It was great fun. You were so
thank
right.
you for putting all the work into it too, Meg. You really did such a great job preparing and leading and adding all the layers to our episode today.
Yeah, really good.
It was a blast.
Really
Thank
good.
you.
And should we have a cheers, ladies?
Cheers!
Cheers!
Thank you for listening to the Wine to Five podcast.
Yay.
Be sure to check us out at Facebook/WineTWO5 and tune in next week for more fun and useful sip tips.